This was so
Yeah.
much fun. I looked up and I'm like, wait a minute, it's
I know.
almost been an
I
hour.
I know.
How
know.
is that possible?
I know. Hi, everyone. It's the book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we are kicking off National Poetry Month
with a very exciting guest.
Yes. James Cruz. This is his new anthology that is coming out in May. We talk about this.
And we talk about these wonderful small poetry collections that he edited that are now available in a box full of poetry.
Yes.
These are wonderful collections. They feel good in your hand. They have a nice texture. I like to keep one by my bedside, one on a coffee table, one in my purse. I'm reading them all the time.
Seriously. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And James stopped by and read some poetry with us. So much fun.
Yes. So enjoy. We mention books, we mention other poets, and we'll put all those links down below.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey
James.
there. How are you guys?
Good.
Good.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Well, we have a bounty of poetry books in front of us here. I wish maybe we should just show you.
Yeah,
like, look at our.
Lovely.
We have all of ours. Yes.
Yes.
That's
So,
awesome.
I mean, I think I discovered the path to kindness. I was visiting my son in Colorado, and there's this beautiful little bookstore called White River Books. And it was sitting out on a table, and I touched it, and I was like, oh, I have to own this. Can you tell us just a little? Well, let's I'm jumping ahead because I'm so excited.
You were doing fine.
Okay.
You just roll with it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, can you tell us how these collections came to be, and particularly the design, because they're such a cool shape and size and feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, these collections first came into being because I approached really more of a local publisher. Story Publishing is about 40 minutes away from where we live in Vermont, in North Adams, Massachusetts. And, I had heard about it from other people. They were affiliated with Workman at the time, so part of a larger group. And I knew that they could potentially have a larger reach. And I think it was the year before I had just published a book of an anthology of poems about kindness and connection called Healing the Divide with a really tiny press here in Vermont called Green Writers Press. And I was thinking like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we sold like, 400 or 500 copies? Like, wouldn't that be great? And it just went kind of crazy because it was right after the 2016 election. So kindness was very much on people's minds, or the lack thereof, I should say. And I really thought it would just be a teaching tool that I could use it in the college classes that I was teaching, intro to creative writing, because there weren't a lot of good, accessible poetry books out there. And so this book, Healing the Divide, just went kind of crazy. And my husband, Brad, by the way, talked me into doing that on a trip up to Montreal. I was, kind of dithering, like, it's going to be a lot of work. I don't know if I can do it all by myself. And he's like, it sounds like you really want to do this. I think you should just do it. And so he's been kind of the driving force behind these anthologies being born. And so I had this idea for an anthology of poems about gratitude and hope, because again, that was something else that seemed like it was missing from the national global conversation. And my husband and I had just gone to Argentina for a visit and spent about a month and a half there. And I was really struck by how grateful people seemed there, and just hopeful, bright. And, we come back to our country and it doesn't really feel the same. It doesn't feel like that's present. And so I just, my corner of the world, my lens through which I see things is poetry. And that's kind of how I see that I can offer some help to people to slow down and embrace some of these positive qualities. So I just sent in a very loose proposal, and I think they were a little hesitant because Story publishes a lot of like how to DIY books, planting seeds, how to make leather sandals, things like this. They're like, poetry, interesting. Well, maybe we'll give it a try. And so I think actually, these smaller books that were, kind of fit in your pocket or fit in your bag were born out of a little bit of hesitance. Like, I don't know how much we can invest in books of poetry here. But once they saw and I saw that this book was really needed, the pandemic hit soon after I proposed the book, and we all needed more gratitude and hope. And so this whole series of books was born, and I really didn't expect that it would be a whole series. How to Love the World, The Path to Kindness, and then The Wonder of Small Things. But it was almost like the books wanted to be born, wanted to be brought into the world. And I feel like as writers and editors, we have to listen to that when the creative call comes. And I was really tired after putting all these books together. So I was like, oh, I'm glad I did this, but I'm going to take some time to rest. So I was glad to do that in between that one and the new one that's coming out soon.
Yeah, do you want to tell us about the new one? We can,
Yeah.
well,
Absolutely.
let's show this great box set. These are the ones you were just talking about. Story was kind enough to send us, Story Publishing, this great
Oh,
box full of poetry. And this is going to be a giveaway for one of our lucky patrons this month in
gosh,
celebration of National Poetry Month.
Yes.
that's so exciting.
And you're talking about the new collection, which we're so lucky to have advanced reader copies of.
Yeah, the newest one is Love is for All of Us. And this was really born out of conversation with my husband, Brad Peacock. He's my co-editor on that book. And we just thought, like, wouldn't it be great to do a book that celebrates love of all kinds, especially poems by LGBTQ plus people and allies who support them. And I think we really kind of came up with the idea when we were walking on the dirt roads around our house here. We love to walk in the mornings and the evenings. And I think I had just gone to the local Pride parade and I was kind of filled up with this feeling of, togetherness, connection with our community here and in a larger way. And it just felt like, especially nowadays, people are so relieved to gather in the name of supporting love. And so we thought it would be great to bring this collection together. Poems of different kinds of love. There's romantic love, but there's also family love and self-love, and of course, love of the natural world. And so um, I have to say, I just said this about the other three books. Like these books really wanted to be brought into being, but I would say this one more than any other book that I've ever put together, it just felt like it took on a life of its own. Like it really, every little piece fell into place much more easily than any other book I've created. And when you're putting together an anthology, you essentially have to secure permission for every single poem that you're putting in this book. Luckily, I know a lot of poets, so that's a little easier. Brad and I both do now. But it is a ton of work corresponding with these poets or their publishers or their agents in some cases. Luckily, Story is so generous. They noticed the vision of this book and were totally supportive of, paying all the permission fees and doing everything that needed to be done. But then Richard Blanco, who was the inaugural poet for President Obama's second term, he agreed to write the foreword for the book. And all these poets sent in work for us to consider, and it was also heartfelt and heart-centered. So I was amazed by how easily and quickly this book came together. Still a lot of work and a labor of love, but just amazing how it all came together.
Yeah.
And the same publisher. So you've obviously convinced Story that publishing that poetry is worth publishing, which is great.
I think they get it now because they're actually publishing several other books of poetry by, Maria Popova just did a book with them called The Universe in Verse, which is beautiful, beautiful hardcover book. And there's another one called The Gift of Animals that they're publishing, which is all about, animals in the natural world, animals that are our daily companions. So people can look for those too. But yeah, I think they get the idea that poetry is a worthwhile enterprise. And I mean, honestly, I have been surprised in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years by how much of a hunger there is for poetry now, how many people are writing it, sharing it, and I would even say turning to it for spiritual guidance, for life guidance. I think that's why we're seeing the popularity of so many folks who have been sharing their poems on social media for years. Um, but I love writing it, sharing my own. I love uplifting the voices of other people. Honestly, that's the most fun part is, kind of gathering poems by poets that people may already know, like Ellen Bass or our current US Poet Laureate, Ada Limon, Ross Gay, people like that. And then introducing emerging poets, people who are still making their name or who are just having their first publication in a book or anthology. So that's been the most fun. And there are many, many people like that in this book. And so Brad and I both have been getting these messages on social media and even text messages from some people like, thank you so much for this book. So it feels like I'm not just saying this to try to sell the book, but it does feel like a special book that is already bringing people together and offering some solace at what could very much be called a difficult time for a lot of folks right
Yeah,
now.
absolutely. I have a question about how you chose the poets for the new collection, Love is for All, because you have like Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde, Minnie Bruce Pratt, like really
Yeah.
well-known canonical poets, if that's safe to say. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
How did you decide between those poets who have passed on, who have established names, and then up and coming poets? How did you go about deciding
Yeah.
to include?
Well, I worked in tandem with Brad, and he's helped me with past anthologies, especially since I'm always trying to keep things in a very accessible track for people so that, people are not turned away by the poetry that they encounter. I want to invite as many people in as possible. But with this one, we really cooperated. And so we opened it up to submissions, posted that on social media. We got like 300 submissions within a few days, so we quickly had to take it down. And then our job was to read through all of those submissions and try and decide, which ones would fit with our vision of what we wanted this book to be. And so we kind of gathered a group of those people, and then we gathered a group of poems that we knew that we loved. And I'm like a poem hunter and gatherer, so I'm just saving poems all the time, like almost in a scrapbook. Like, oh, I love this. And so I have many, many poems to choose from, and my social media feed is just almost all poems all the time, which is lovely for me. So we kind of pulled everything together. And one of my favorite things to do, I think this is why I am an anthologist and why Brad is now too. One of my favorite things to do is to just sit down and really see how these poems are all talking to each other. Because with each anthology I've done, I've tried to arrange the poems so that each poem is kind of leading as seamlessly as possible into the next. So, like in The Wonder of Small Things, there's this sort of funny run of poems that are all about tomatoes, like eating tomatoes, growing tomatoes, making sauce from tomatoes. And when I was recording the audio for that book, the guys in the studio were like, "Wow, you must really be a fan of tomatoes." But I'm really just paying attention to what poems have come across our desk in a particular moment. And so that was very much the process for this book. And in some cases, I think one poem makes me think of a poem that I read years ago. And so I pull that one in and see if that one fits. We talk a little bit about that. And then there may have been even poems that we rejected in our initial kind of going through of the groups of work that we were sent. And so, we're seeing how things are coming together. And there was one instance where Brad was like, hey, what about that poem by so and so? And I'm like, oh, I'm not sure. And he's like, just pull it in, see how it reads together. And I did that. Of course, he was right. And so he'll be glad to hear that. And so we pulled it in, and it's to me, it's almost like conducting a symphony. I am including some of my own work and Brad's too in this book, but for the most part, I'm like pulling back and just seeing like how are all these poems speaking to each other? What kind of overarching, theme or story are the poems telling? And that's the most interesting thing to me. I've always tried to do that in my own collections. But when you're working with an anthology, essentially, as long as you can afford the poem, for the permission fees, the choices are endless. So you really can build a book that that kind of feels like more of a cohesive whole. So symphony, I've also thought of it as like a quilt. You're bringing together all of these disparate pieces and you're just kind of stitching them together into this big, beautiful whole. So that's kind of how we choose. Maybe that's a longer answer than you want to look
No,
into the
that's perfect.
process.
Yeah, no, I love to learn these things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we take a poetry break?
Sure.
Would you mind reading a poem and then we can ask another question?
Absolutely. I think it's always time for a poetry break in this house, at least. So what I think I'll do, I just have this open actually. This is from my last book of poems called Unlocking the Heart. And this is a book of poems, reflections, and writing prompts because I wanted to do this book because I love sending out a weekly newsletter that has my own poems, a little reflection, and then a writing prompt for people. And it's gotten really popular. It's called the Weekly Pause. And it's just such a pleasure to see what people write to my own poem, how it resonates with them or what it sparks for them. And this poem feels very appropriate for our moment. This one is called Orbit. Go where it's warm is perhaps the best advice we can offer each other in times of distress. A pair of arms held out in the hospital room, or mugs of mint tea taken together at the table of mourning. You feel it as a force field, an orbit you slip into as soon as you meet someone new and sense that small, blazing star pulsing in their chest, drawing you closer until you know you'll be circling that source of light and heat for the rest of your life.
Oh, lovely. Wow. Thank you. Oh, we should tell people too. We will put links to all of these books down below so you can run and buy them, which we know you're going to
Yes.
want to do after this. I wanted to ask about in the smaller collections, there are reflective pauses in between sections of the poetry. And then in Love is for All of Us, there are essays on belonging. Can you talk about the decisions you made to set them up that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the smaller collections, the anthologies, the first three anthologies, I've sort of like with my own poems, I've always loved creating little openings into a poem for people, and certain poems just feel more like open doors to me than others. And so I just had this idea, and I think this was one of the reasons why Story was attracted to publishing the book, that, if you have these little kind of prose breaks in between the poems, it gives the reader a chance to just take a pause, maybe reflect on some of the themes that have been coming up, reflect in a deeper way on a poem that has been presented, And then maybe, I always say it's an invitation for writing or reflection. So it's a reflective pause, take a breath, and then the prompt that I give, you can write to it, you can reflect on it. It's just maybe a way to go a little bit deeper into the poem and then into, I think, one's own experience, because that's what I'm most interested in with poetry. I think poetry gets a bad rap and a bad reputation sometimes because of our own experiences, maybe in high school at times, kind of having to analyze much older poems by like Shakespeare, John Donne, someone like that. So we get this idea that poetry is always to be picked apart instead of just enjoyed and connected to our daily life. And so I think part of my mission, really with my own books, with these anthologies, has been to show people that poetry can be and really maybe ought to be connected to our daily lived life, that most poems that are being written and published now are really just about the lived life of a speaker or a poet, and that there's nothing to be afraid of. These reflective pauses and then even the essays in Love is for All of Us are meant to kind of be these gentle invitations into a deeper kind of space of reflecting, thinking, and connecting to the poem as it's presented.
Yeah. Oh, I love those, the reflective pauses, because I think sometimes when I'm reading poetry, I'll kind of like start reading too fast. Like, oh,
Yeah.
the next one, and I don't always take that pause myself. And then that's when, you can get just so jumbled in your
That's
head.
right.
So it's really nice to have that break in there in the books, to help you have that pause and then to give you a little guidance. And I wouldn't mind reading one, from How to Love the World. I've been rereading the poems, in all of these anthologies, the last week or so, maybe a little bit longer, and some of them really wreck me. I shared one with Emily earlier today that I won't read because I will just start crying again, because it so hit me. But I wanted to read this one. It's by Andrea Potus, and it's called Essential Gratitude. Sometimes it just stuns you, like an arrow flung from some angel's wing. Sometimes it hastily scribbles a list in the air: black coffee, thick new books, your pillow's cool underside, the quirky family you married into. It is content with so little, really. Even the ink of your pen along the watery lines of your dime store notebook could be a swiftly moving prayer. And I just love everything about that poem. And then I'll just show this up for people to see. So you have the poem and then, the reflection pause. And this one, um, there's a little bit about the poem, and then the invitation for writing and reflection. I'll read that for everyone. The next time a sudden feeling of appreciation stuns you, take the time to write out your own gratitude list as soon as possible. When you pay attention, what specific sensory details about this grateful moment stand out to you as worthy of praise? And I just think that's something we could all do. It doesn't take that long, and it could just really change your whole energy for the day or for your evening if you do it when you come home from work. And I just want to thank you because I appreciate these so much.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks to both of you for reading through them and wanting to uplift the books. I just have to ask, Chris, because I'm curious, which poem is the one that really undid you? You don't
Oh
have to
my
read
gosh.
it.
I have a note here.
Find the one with teardrops on the
I
paper.
know.
That's
I
right.
I even put a note. This poem wrecked me. Cannot read it. Um, it's by Rebecca Faust, or
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
Kingship of Flesh, and it's about sisters. So, yeah.
And it's in a different collection.
Yes, this is in The Path to Kindness.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that poem. It's, it's about sisters who are on very different ends of the political spectrum. And then she has this moment of noticing, not that it fixes everything, but she just notices how alike they are physically and feels that, deep familial connection to her sister.
Yeah, and they're old. They're older
That's right.
women, which
That's
is
right.
a very different type of poem to read, because I think sometimes ages are not mentioned in poems, it seems. And that's one of the poems I think too, like had I read it when I was younger, I would have thought, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I would have had a different take on it. Granted, when I was younger, our situation in our country was a lot different as well.
That's right.
But yeah, it really resonated with me for so many different reasons. And as I said, wrecked me.
Yeah.
I love that you had a note, this wrecked me, please do not read. I feel the same way about so many of those poems in these anthologies, even in the newest one, Love is for All of Us, and I think it's partly because of what poetry does. It just captures these small moments in such dense language. And it's almost like this, emotional Alka-Seltzer tab, like I can't believe I'm using this as a metaphor, but it's like, you drop the tab and you pour in water and it's just fizzing. It's just like overflowing. And I feel like so many of these pieces are like that because of how, frankly, talented the poets are at just, that's a pretty small poem, but the way she packs the emotional revelation into that poem is so beautiful. And the same with the poem that you just read, Essential Gratitude by Andrea Potis. It's a very small poem, but she has specifics in there. She has the coffee, the notebook, the fact that you married into this quirky family. We all have our random gratitudes. And I agree with you, Chris, that it would be lovely if we could just come home after work and, do that or start the day with that. And it's science too. I love when poetry meets science, but scientists have proven that keeping a gratitude list can actually improve your happiness. And the reason I say in that invitation to try to be as specific as possible and include sensory details is that we connect more emotionally with something if we're being more specific and if it's somehow sensory related. And so if you just say, I'm grateful for my house, my car, and my job, and now I'm ready to move on, it's like, no, 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 it has to be specific moments, the way that you sat next to your sister and you noticed how similar your hands are, or these other small moments that the poets describe in these collections and that I do in my own work. I think that's the power of poetry. And that sort of gets lost sometimes in when people try to reject poetry, like, oh, it's too difficult, it's too complicated. I think the best poetry for me is really about those daily moments of just almost like little revelation, little bits of wonder and awe that we can find throughout our day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just a unique way of saying something.
Yeah.
There's another poem I really like, and the image that stuck with me was that putting her hands like this is like a little cave of prayer.
Yes.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just
Yeah.
a little cave for a prayer. I just love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one is from When You Meet Someone Deep in Grief by Patricia McKernan Runkle. That's in The Path to Kindness, but I may have that completely wrong
I was going
too.
to say, that is
Yeah.
so impressive.
I know. I
If
know.
I get that right, I deserve some
Yeah.
kind of
Yes,
prize here.
some sort of
Yeah.
award.
All right.
The path. So what was the name
It's
again?
called When You Meet Someone Deep in Grief.
Oh, actually, it is a different poem.
It's a different one.
Sorry, James. Yeah,
Darn.
it's by Laura Bodowski Wisniewski,
Oh, yeah.
A Beginner's Guide to Gardening Alone.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, did I read it?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, why not?
You can't leave everyone hanging.
Okay, A Beginner's Guide to Gardening Alone. Because a hummingbird perched on a high branch of the alder, because I raised my eyes from the ground of my obsessions, I saw her linger. Because a green tinged feather causes this world, with its fool's winds, with its flawed light, with its thrust, its false fledges, a red hibiscus opened. Its petals were like palms parting, like the lips of the world parting. Because a teardrop of nectar ran from the deep mine of the flower onto its trembling stamen, onto its stigma, its muteness, onto its speckled rubies. I brought my hands together. Between my palms, there formed a dark cave of prayer. Between my lips, there slipped a faint breath of flight.
Mm.
I'm
I
so
love
glad
that.
you focused on that one.
I
Yeah,
have that one marked too. I love that poem.
yeah,
It's a really
Yeah.
nice one for this time of year, like with
yeah,
things reopening and, I love that poem.
yeah. I did too, and just the structure of it too, which I don't pay attention to a ton, but like the parting, right in the middle of the poem is the parting. The two lines at the middle of the poem end in the word parting. So there's the petals parting, and then the lips of the world parting, and I just, I admire that. So that somebody can write something like this and create such a profound moment from something that happens in the garden and then write this beautiful poem.
I
Yeah.
loved this. What was the line where, you know, where you're distracted?
Yes.
Raised my eyes from the ground of my obsessions.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because,
yes.
there's
Yeah.
that some that pulls your eye and then you have that experience because yeah.
Well, I don't because I'm just never obsessed. I'm never caught by my own thoughts at all, you know? No, we can all relate to that so much. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's what initially drew me in about that poem is like, oh my gosh, it feels like so many of my poems are like, I was feeling this. I was, locked in distraction. I was focused on this. And then I looked up, I looked out, I looked over, something happened to kind of pull me back to the world around me and then into myself. And I think that's what she captures so well in that poem that when, this hummingbird kind of grabs her attention and then it pulls her back to the world around her outside of her mind. But it also strangely, I find that the language is so embodied, the lips of the world
Mhm.
hurting, the petals opening like palms. So it's like she's back in the world, but somehow she's also back in her own body and relating to the world in that way too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we all know that feeling. I want more of those feelings.
Yes.
And I think that's why poetry draws me in so much too, is that it almost gives a roadmap back to that feeling like, oh, this is what it's like to come alive again to the world.
Yeah. Gosh, James, how did you first get into poetry?
Hmm.
Did-
Well, I had an amazing third grade teacher, Mrs. Sharon Brown, who had a whole unit around poetry. I mean, she really, looking back now and all the teachers that I've had and knowing what I know, because this was in a tiny town in Missouri, in the middle of the country, she just had this very wide, open vision and wanted to open the world up to each of us. We were studying things about Thailand and, reading books of poetry by Shel Silverstein. And then eventually she invited us, well, I should say, required us to memorize and recite a poem to the class as part of this poetry unit that we were doing. And I thought, what if I wrote my own poem? Then, what would that be like? And I was a very, very shy kid. So for me to even ask permission to do that was pretty amazing. And I think my own family was really shocked and a little worried for me. Like, wait, you're gonna recite your poem in front of the whole class? Like you can barely talk in a group. But there was something that pulled me in with poetry, always with language, reading. And luckily, she was super enthusiastic about it. And I did it. And I think just having everyone's response, like, wow, I can't believe you wrote that, or you wrote that yourself? That was your poem? That was like the first feedback I ever got. And it was also positive. I mean, it took a lot of energy to do that. But I'm so glad I did. And I'm so grateful that she supported me in that way. And I'm pretty sure throughout the rest of that school year, she now had this awareness of me as a writer and a poet, as someone who was interested in this. And so every opportunity, she would give me an option to write my own poems, write a little collection of poems in response to something. And I've just been very, very blessed to have really good teachers. I had those teachers because they had to, you know, um, force us to study the John Donne and the Shakespeare and analyze the poems. And that probably helped me as a writer too. But I've just been so blessed to have so many supportive and really good teachers, and even teachers who saw something in me that I couldn't see. Like I had a high school teacher who pulled me aside after I wrote this essay that she really loved in response to I forget what it was, but to something that we were reading, maybe a short story. And and I think she knew that I was going to go into international business. That was going to be my major in college. And she was instrumental. She's like, I don't think you can study international business because I wanted to learn French. And, I grew up really poor, so I thought I should also make money. And she's like, I just don't think you should do that. I really think you have a gift. And, I don't want to tell you what to do, but I think you should pursue it. And then I thought, okay, well then maybe I'll be an English major and I'll teach English. That seems secure enough. And that sort of became my path, although it's been much more circuitous than than just that. And yeah, so I'm really grateful to all those teachers, and there have been many others who have been instrumental along the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Teachers for the win.
Yes.
That's a
Yeah,
great story. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing it.
absolutely.
Can you read another poem for us?
I can. Maybe I'll read something from the new book. Um, this poem has traveled around a lot. This is probably, I would say, one of my most well-known poems. And this poem wrecks me a little bit, Chris, so I'm sorry to be sharing it in some ways, but it does feel appropriate. This one is called Telling My Father. And this is about a moment that I had with my father not long before he died. So he died when he was just 43 years old, very young. And I was 20 years old, and this was before I was able to come out to him and kind of let him know who I really am in so many different ways besides just the coming out. But but this poem really helped heal me because it helped me to realize that my father saw me and knew me for who I was, even if we didn't exchange those words. And I think now that with men, especially, oftentimes it's gesture more than words that communicates the emotion that they're trying to offer. And so this poem is very much about that. This is called Telling My Father. I found him on the porch that morning, sipping cold coffee, watching a crow dip down from the power line into the pile of black bags stuffed in the dumpster, where he pecked and snagged a can tab, then carried it off, clamped in his beak like the key to a room only he knew about. My father turned to me then, taking in the reek of my smoke, traces of last night's eyeliner I decided not to wipe off this time. Out late was all he said, and then smiled, rubbing the small of my back through the robe for a while before heading inside, letting the storm door click softly shut behind him. Later, when I stepped into the kitchen again, I saw it waiting there on the table, a glass of orange juice he had poured for me and left sweating in a patch of sunlight so bright I couldn't touch it at first.
I love
Wow.
that poem
Yes.
so much. Thank you for
Thank
reading
you.
that.
Yeah,
that was
it's a tough one to read for
Yeah.
sure. I have to try my best to keep it together or not.
Yeah.
It's okay to lose it
Right.
sometimes too.
Totally. Yeah.
But,
Oh my God, the storm door closing softly behind him while that.
Mhm. Well, and I just love like you said, the gesture, the pat on the back, you know. Yeah.
yeah, the glass of orange juice,
Mhm.
that still seems so
Mhm.
clear to me.
Mhm.
And I think, sometimes I'm not sure that I could do that with every poem, but this was such a charged moment that came back to me from memory. I didn't consciously remember this as this moment when this exchange happened, when my father was saying, yes, I embrace you for who you are. I still love you. But it just came through memory, and it came in the midst of grief, in the midst of writing about losing my father and trying to remember him. And, I think there are just some moments that we can recreate as writers that, even every time I read that poem, and I've read it a lot now, I feel like I'm living inside that moment with him again. And so it strikes me that it's the magic of writing, it's the magic of books, that if you're writing about something that actually happened to you, the old saying is that you get to live it twice, but I actually think you get to live it again and again and again and again. Each time you read it, each time someone else shares it or reads it. So it's a very magical thing. And so thank you for the invitation to read another poem.
It's so true. I mean, I had poems that I've read every day during certain points in my life that have literally saved my life,
Mm,
you know? And I think that that's the gift that you writers give, when you write these things. You're sharing your experience, but you're also allowing us readers to have our experiences with it.
yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly how I have felt. When I'm writing something, I can't usually think about how other people are going to receive it, but I turn to poetry as a life-saving force in my own life. Poetry, both the reading of other people's and the writing of it on my own, saves me on a daily basis. And the practice of writing every day is led me through several grief journeys, has led me through the pandemic, is saving me right now because I think it grounds me. It brings me back, just like the poem that you just read before, Chris, that it brings me back to the world around me, whatever that world is including. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it is grief and brokenness, but I think when we're honest about what our world includes, it's going to speak to us. And then that honesty and authenticity is going to carry over to other people. And my theory is that, that was the case with Mary Oliver as well. She, imagine how many lives her poems have saved, will continue to save. And I think that she turned to poetry as someone who had a very difficult childhood, a very difficult past, and turned to the natural world as these life-saving forces in her life. And because she gave herself over to them in that moment of needing to be saved, then they're able to be passed on and used by other people, just like you were saying, Emily, to save their lives as well. And so that's another magical aspect, mysterious aspect to this thing we call poetry.
Can I read one?
Please.
Yes, please.
So every year I choose a poem to put on in a place in my house that I'll see constantly. And this poem in particular is on my bathroom mirror.
Mm.
It's by Rosemary Watala Trummer, and this is from the collection How to Love the World. Hope. Hope has holes in its pockets. It leaves little crumb trails so that we, when anxious, can follow it. Hope's secret? It doesn't know the destination. It knows only that all roads begin with one foot in front of the other. I love that poem so much. And I have to tell you that when getting these collections and reading about reading the reflective pauses and being encouraged to write, I started a project with one of my friends where we send each other prompts every week. And so that was one of the prompts I sent. I just took the title, Hope Has Holes in Its Pockets. Actually, I guess that's the first line, isn't it? Hope has holes in its pocket. The title is Hope. And this is my friend Shuli Setchel Kaywood.
Oh yeah.
And you do know Shuli? Okay. And so she wrote a poem called Hope Has Holes in Its Pockets. This is from the collection Something So Good It Can Never Be Enough. And I thought I would just read it. Hope has holes in its pockets. It's true what they say about jeans. They fit everyone, but no one well. They're comfortable, but not flattering. They keep in the heat and also trap the cold. Don't wear them skiing. Don't wear them hiking. Don't wear them to a fancy restaurant, although now that might be in fashion. If you're a farmer, forget what I said. You will love them and hold them up with a big leather belt. You will bale hay in them. You will brush the horses all while you wear your best blue jeans, or your favorite, or your most broken in. Is there a difference? Sometimes a heart needs breaking in. Sometimes it's better once it's been battered. Sometimes the only way forward is to pull on those pants. Jeans made for everything, then. I didn't see them for what they were, capable of being stitched and stretched and paired for any occasion. Wear them with sneakers, wear them with heels, wear them with rhinestones studded down their sides. Even when weary, they can be washed and reborn, ready for the time of their life.
Lovely. Yeah.
It's so fun what you can do with poetry.
It begins with blue jeans. I mean,
Right.
it's like the plainest thing in the world. And then the deeper and deeper she goes into it, it just becomes this meditation on heartbreak and, these deeper things. So I love that too. Yeah. And I love how one poem can feed another. So I'm often inviting people, use my first line or use this title or use a phrase, whatever it takes to kind of get you writing, I think is the most important thing. And you can always say like after Rosemary Watolich,
Right.
whatever it might be. And that first line or that initiating phrase might eventually fall away too. But I think even the poems that I include that don't necessarily have prompts, like this new book doesn't have prompts, but I think there are many prompts contained within the poems themselves, and that people will be able to find those poems on their own and hopefully, really write into those openings. And I love that you guys created this practice with each other.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it's always interesting, like you said, where your mind goes. You think you're going to start somewhere and it usually ends up somewhere else.
Yeah, almost always. I feel like my writing practice is a practice in surprise, like just being open to surprise, because I think I feel a certain way. I think I know where it's going, and I am proven wrong probably 99.999% of the time, but it just takes on a life of its own.
That's a great line right there. My writing practice is a practice in surprise. I love that.
This week's prompt.
Yes. Wow, James. This has been so lovely. Thank you so much for helping us celebrate National Poetry Month. As we said to you, we think every month should be National Poetry Month, but they did choose April to be the National Poetry Month.
Well, I can't think of a better way to kick it off than being with the two of you. So thank you so much, Chris and Emily. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate folks like you giving us a platform to share poetry and lift that up a little bit too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for your beautiful writing.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks for all you do.
Take care,
Bye.
James.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.